Greetings YouTube, Lester Crone of Strolling Bones here. It's been quite a while since I've been online doing anything gaming related apart from the Reckless Dice podcast, which we do bi-weekly. We record and release bi-weekly. And that's a podcast, once again, for all things Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the 3rd edition. I've been working a lot lately, which has been taking away a lot of my personal time for gaming and developing and things of that nature. But hopefully that will die down here over the next little bit, and I'll be able to get back on track. My schedule is all messed up because I've been working night crew, so I'm all over the place. I've been having a lot of difficulty sleeping, and that's kind of prevented me from being able to do videos. I have roommates and I'm awake during the early morning hours, and I don't want to wake them up by making too much noise, and then I sleep all day and then pretty much go to work once I wake up. So there's the quick update from what's going on with my channel. Hopefully right away here I'll be able to start getting up more videos. With this new job, I've actually been able to budget a lot more money into gaming related things, and I am currently in the process of saving up for a nice handheld video camera so I can show you more of the surroundings that I live in, and do a little bit more experimental video blogging here. I want to still be involved in the community, especially the gaming community here on YouTube. So I'm mainly making this video right now as a response to Robert J. Freemantle's video, What Got You Into Gaming? Now he sent me a message and requested that I made a video, and this was sent quite a while ago, and I'm just now being able to get around to it. It's early morning and my girlfriend fell asleep on the couch, so I have access to my office here, which is actually just built right into our room. And this is my chance to answer your question, Robert. I like a lot of the stuff you do. I really like the Their Fated Travels. I'm a huge fan of the Warhammer world, but here we go. I'm gonna take a stab at what got me into gaming. First of all, I have to thank and note that it is my mother, bar none, who got me into fantasy. And it was fantasy literature that led me to gaming, and an interest in gaming, and an interest in role-playing especially. So books that my mother read me as a child, I have some of them around here, but most of them are packed away, so I can't really show you any of them by hand. I'm sure most of you have heard of or read these books before, but the first one is quite obviously the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. That was probably the most formative piece of literature that got me into fantasy. And fantasy is what ultimately led me into my gaming addiction, or habit that I have, I guess. Lord of the Rings is a fantastic story. For all of you, those of you who haven't actually read it, who've just cheated and watched the movies, I highly suggest doing your best to try to plug through those novels. The amount of character information and just the depth of detail in the world that he created, that Tolkien created, is fantastic. For game masters, for players alike, a great resource. A little long-winded because it was written back in the day, back in the 40s or 50s. Or those books were written back then, and he uses a much more antiquarian type language, much more Victorian, I should say. Lots of words, but fantastic story. That was the first one she read to us, and she would read that to us periodically over the course of the first 10 to 12 years of my life. She read those books to us. She also read the Sword of Shannara series by Terry Brooks, or I guess the Shannara series. They went on to make more books. I never finished that. I only read the first 4 or 5, I believe. But those are fantastic novels as well. And then the series The Belgariad by David Eddings, was also very formative on in my understanding of fantasy literature and the idea of world creation and stuff like that. And my mom was also kind of an aspiring writer back when I was much younger, and we lived further north. And I remember spending lots of time with her coming up with place names and people names, and we used to play games of make believe all the time. We would turn chores into games of make believe and things like that. And so that would be probably my first formative experience of mixing fantasy literature with a gaming aspect, kind of. So I have to thank my mom pretty much fully for my introduction to fantasy literature and in the idea of using my imagination to create games. Now, the reason I play games is because, well, A, they're fun, but and they're a great creative outlet. That's why I'm such a fan of Warhammer, the tabletop battles game, because of the sheer amount of artistic creativity involved. Plus, also there's all sorts of other elements, but and that is the main reason I'm also involved heavily in role playing games. That would be because I really enjoy the depth of creativity that is offered by them. So basically, my next major experience with gaming would have been after we moved from up north. We came down south and lived in this small little community, and I had a friend, and it was kind of my first experience with the whole role playing, like direct role playing thing. This was right around the same time that Hero Quest came out. It had been out for a little while, and we'd gotten our hands on a couple boxes, and we would play that game incessantly. And that was my first experience with the game master player mechanic, and the idea of dungeon delving. And I played Hero Quest to death, and then this friend of mine had been really into Warhammer, and he introduced me to the world through magazines and also through the Hero Quest. I was also introduced to the world, but more fully I was introduced to the world and the hobby through this fellow. And we also would do homebrew games, very simple games where we would draw out maps, like maps of the world on hexagons, and you travel through, and then we would basically play out, this is what happens, what do you do, and roll dice for skill resolution, but mostly just if there was an element of danger or something random, we would roll dice to resolve the outcome. If we had a dispute on what was going to happen, we'd roll the dice to discover the outcome, or to divine the outcome, I guess. We mixed that with another game that we played that was similar to Warhammer. We would use Lego pieces. You had hundreds and hundreds of Lego people, and we would do a system where everybody got, like, each player got X number of legs, and then you could spend points essentially on horses and different forms of armor and weaponry, which would give you bonuses. And then we would essentially play a very simplified version of Warhammer. And that was my first serious exposure to gaming. So Hero Quest played a huge role. And these homebrew games also led me to get into Dungeons and Dragons more. And because of my background, my family background, I was actually not allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. Even though my mother was very, very into it, the rest of the family kind of frowned on it. And I liked to write around the time, so I would write a lot of stuff. And when I realized what Dungeons and Dragons really was, how it was it was a creative outlet where you could create worlds and create stories and characters, I really latched on to that. And my first Dungeons and Dragons experience was relatively early. It was in the 90s, the early to mid 90s, and it was quite complex, but it was right up my alley. So I started playing intermittently, playing little bits of second edition D&D, but it wasn't until about 2 years before they released, it was probably about a year actually before they released the third edition of Dungeons and Dragons that I really started playing heavily. And we played a lot of second edition Dungeons and Dragons, with all of us taking turns being the game master and the narrator. So that And around that time, Magic the Gathering played a huge role in sucking me into gaming, I should say. And I played that incessantly for years. I wasn't a collector because my friend, who I ended up playing a lot of this Dungeons and Dragons, experiencing third edition for the first time with this friend and a group of friends that would hang out at his house. But anyway, this friend, his brother, had given him a box of Magic cards that he had collected, thousands of them. And we would sit there making decks and playing and coming up with stories and playing all sorts of other games. Video games played a big role in my development, or in my gaming life, the development of my gaming life. They still have to this day. I like to play video games, but I definitely prefer a more hands-on, miniatures based or role-playing pen and paper based game. I just find there's more options and variety, and I get more of a kick out of it, if you will. So those are probably my major formative gaming experiences. What really got me into gaming would be fantasy literature, and then this experience with these games, trying them out, and the desire for creative freedom, or a reason to be creative, if you will. I also watched a lot of cartoons. They played a big role. Things like He-Man, as silly as it is, or Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Those things, once again, that I think that falls more so into fantasy literature, but those really got me into gaming and got me into designing my own adventures and my own stories. I like to intermingle my writing with gaming. That's why I like to play role-playing games. And currently, I've said this in lots of videos, but currently this is the role-playing game that I'm all about right now. Playing it, we're playing it quite a bit. I'm involved in a podcast for it, and I have a bunch of things in the works right now for instructional videos. There are a few out there, but I would really like to do some more artistic and in-depth videos that involve showing you how this game works. It will probably be a little while. I want to get that camera first, so I can get better angles and things like that. But I really want to showcase this game because that's what I've been playing lately, and I really like a lot of the mechanics it brings to the forefront. But one other thing I really wanted to touch on was the Lone Wolf books. Robert, you say that you played those fantasy. Oh shit! I'm sorry. I totally blanked on what the names of those fighting fantasy books or whatever. And those sound fantastic. And I'm definitely going to be looking out for those and trying to get my hands on them at the local gaming slash bookstore. Hopefully they have a few of those. But Lone Wolf, that was the one I played, and I know that Jeremiah or Meta Rockwell and I share that in common. We were both very big fans of Lone Wolf. Those books were incredible. Once again, Lone Wolf was written by a guy named Joe Denver, and they are, I can't remember what the name of the world is right now off the top of my head, but you can research it. Just look up Lone Wolf Adventure Books or Lone Wolf by Joe Denver. And those are really fantastic books. You can actually access them online. I'll put the link in the show notes here, but you can access all of the stuff that he made online in online HTML version, choose your own adventures, essentially. So if anybody wants to have an experience with those, they can hop on over to that website. All you need is a 10-sided dice, and you just whip yourself up a character sheet really quick. It doesn't take too long, and there's examples on the website. But other than that, I'd have to say that the reason I like to game, I think I was on this point earlier and I kind of trailed off on it. It's really early in the morning, so I'm not thinking very straight. But the reason I game, apart from an enjoyment in the creative aspects and stuff like that, is that it curbs depression. I suffer from depression and have been diagnosed as slightly manic, and I get depressed due to weather and all sorts of different things. But I like to be creative and to play games, and I find that is the number one reason why I still maintain sanity, is my ability to be free to play these games and to create enjoyment out of these games and with these games. So that's what got me into gaming. And yeah, I hope that this is helpful for your project that you're making. Keep it up, man, and peace.